I've been I I travel for fun, taking risks in South America, backpacking when I don't speak a
Oh,
single word of
I'm so
Spanish.
jealous.
Believe me, I'm not afraid of not pulling out something fictional.
Hi guys, and welcome back to Tales on the Green Dragon. This is a series where I get to interview some of the best authors in fantasy right now, and I'm very, very excited to introduce you all to the wonderful Faye, also known under her pen name as Sienna Frost. Faye has truly lived a life of adventure, having left home at 14 and found her way across 4 continents as a traveler and adventurer. But today we are here to talk about her self-published book, Obsidian Awakening, which is one of many Faye has written over 2 decades and allowed Faye to grow a burgeoning fan base on Wattpad and now in the fully published arena. Obsidian Awakening, I'm just going to keep tripping over that, aren't I? Awakening is a grimdark fantasy centered around a male escort turned assassin and deals with themes of war, politics, and more, and has been described as Arabian Nights meets Game of Thrones, as well as a few references to Dune that I've seen thrown about. Beloved by esteemed colleagues such as Steve from Steve Talks Books, Craig the Bookworm, and an Indie Ink Awards finalist, this book has been consistently high on Mount TBR, and I think I'm going to get there this month. So finally, and it is an absolute honor to have Faye here with me today to share about her journey and her books. Faye, how are you doing today?
I'm great, thank you. Hi, everyone.
It's wonderful to have you here. We've been saying just before we got on, we've been trying to do this for so long, and it's wonderful just to finally be on here with you and have the opportunity. And I'm really excited to actually read it this month. It's been glaring at me in my Kindle.
It's an honor, and it's really flattering to be invited on interviews like this, to have just to know that people are actually interested in hearing what I have to say.
Well, it's always
That
an
alone
honor.
is
Yeah.
close to getting people to read my book.
Well, I've certainly seen your book around the community. I think probably I first saw it must have been when it was first coming out, probably about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And I saw
That
that
early.
cover with the sword and everything in the dark blue colors, and it was very striking, and it caught my eye, and I thought that's an interesting title, Obsidian. It's something that I've never really kind of seen in fantasy, a similar title like that. So it caught my eye. And then I saw you on Steve with Steve Talks Books, and yeah, so I think you're definitely kind of in the community a little bit, and hopefully this gets more people to kind of check out your books and see if it's for them.
Thank you. I actually, with the title that you just mentioned, it actually gave me a bit of a difficulty because I think quite a few books have used the name Obsidian to mean black,
Oh yes, yeah.
and that's the only thing that people think of. And I've been accused of having too generic a name. It's too cliche. Everybody, think it's just black. But there is a story behind that title that not many people know unless they pick up the book and then read the excerpts, the introduction, because I named it Obsidian because this is a book about broken heroes, who people who broke into weapons. And one of the thing about Obsidian is that you must break it before it becomes a deadly weapon. That's how you make arrowheads and weapons out of, and it breaks really sharp. So before you can use obsidian as a weapon, you must break it. And that's a
Yeah.
symbol. That's why it's titled that way. All the MCs in the book have been or about to be broken into weapons. That's actually the title. When everybody that I told, they actually find it really fascinating. But until I said that, everyone thinks it just means something black,
Yeah.
a
Well,
black stone. Yeah.
when I first saw it, I was thinking, Obsidian, well, that's like a stone or a gem, so and it's awakening. I was thinking, I was sort of intrigued. I was like, well, why is this? What does it mean, this awakening thing? So I certainly didn't see it as generic, but then I'm just a bit crazy. So
I didn't know it either. I was looking for the title and I'm not sure. I just ran it into the wiki page of, by accident, and I saw that and I was like, wow, this is the perfect name for this story that I'm trying to write. So yes, that's something that a lot of people don't know about the name of the book, the series.
yeah, and so it is a series. So how many books are you sort of planning it to be right now? It's always a difficult question,
I'm
isn't it?
I don't know. I'm a pantser. I'm a
Okay.
chronic pantser. An extreme one. I don't know even the next chapter that I'm about to write. So as of now, I know for sure I cannot wrap this up by book 2. There will definitely be book 3, but I'm not sure how, if it will go on after book 3. It could be 5, it could be 10.
Yeah.
I love long series. I'm a fan of the Wheel of Time.
Oh, really? Me
I
too.
expect to be writing this series for a long, long time because there's just so many characters that I love, and all of them have their own stories. I know for sure that this will be 3 or more books, with definitely one sequel that I promised a lot of readers that everyone is looking forward to, that they're saying finished. I said I would not write that prequel until I'm done with the series, but that is the backstory of one of one of readers' most favorite character. So they all want to, because he in the book starts when he's already king or an emperor sort of,
Okay.
and he's just this, I'm not sure if I should call him a protag or an antag, because he's like this toxic dictator that everybody loves,
Yeah.
because in a way, from a point of view, he is the leader that we all need, but he is a dictator. So he has this really complicated past. He's admired by a lot of readers, and so eventually they all told me, we need to see him before he climbs to the throne, his struggles, his journey to the throne. So that's the prequel that I promised everyone, and I really want to write it, but I can't write 2 things at the same time. So I said I have to finish the main series first, and then I will go and write his prequel. So there would be at least 4 that I know of right now, at least.
That sounds incredible. I'm a fan of long series myself. It's funny you mentioned the Wheel of Time because I was always being into fantasy, but really kind of like the first time I really got into it about 13 was because I picked up the Wheel of Time for the first time, and I didn't know anything about it really. All I knew was, wow, I'm 13 years old, and oh my goodness, it's 14 books. They're all like 1,000 pages, and oh my goodness, this must be the most epic thing ever, because of course a book that's more than 500 pages is guaranteed to be epic, and it can't possibly be, slow or anything. That was just my 13-year-old brain. And
See,
it's
I mean, that I love that you feel that way, because I've talked to quite a few fantasy readers who don't like series and they want standalone and they don't want it to go on too long. They don't want each book to be too long. I grew up with manga and C
okay.
drama, 60
Yeah.
episodes per series, and manga goes on. I read JoJo Adventure, and that's like hundreds of volumes, and
Yeah.
I to that kind of level of epic, series where you can see the journey from when the main character is maybe 6 to the day he dies, and it just really stays with you. You go through the series for years, and then you grow a bond with it, and I love that feeling. So when I actually was reading, I didn't discover Wheel Time until a few years back, I think 5 or 6 years ago,
Okay.
when I was reading Game of Thrones or something, and then it ended, and I get pissed when when series ended, because when series I love ends, I don't like them to end.
Yeah.
So I started searching the longest fantasy
That's literally
series, and
what I
I
did.
came
Yeah.
up, and I actually started reading it because I was like, oh, 10 volumes. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
run out.
I've
So
only made it through to 6 at the moment, but
it is totally possible that I'm going to drag Obsidian to somewhere that long, because that's where my heart is. I love long series. I'm about to start Malasan because of the length as well.
me too. I got it on my shelf. I need to read it. I got the physical copy. I need to read it because, well, I'm going traveling in a few years. Well, 18 months, and I'm going to be away for like 5 years, and I'm not going to be able to take any books with me.
Wow.
So I'm in like a race now to like read all the physical editions that I have, and I'm sort of imposing a ban on physical books just so I can get Kindles so I can carry on reading for the next 5 years.
Oh
But
wow.
yeah.
What's that plan about? Where are you going?
Well, to be honest, I don't really know. All I know for certain is that I'm going to go to New Zealand. I think I'm set on. I'm sort of tired. So I wanted to go to New Zealand. I spent 9 months there before when I was 18, and I'll be just turning 25 about a month after I plan to go to New Zealand.
Exciting.
So it's kind of like almost like full circle. And then I plan to work there for 18 months, 2 years, then hop over to Australia. Perhaps I'm not too fussed about Australia, but it's another place to earn money and travel, and I don't know much about it. And then I want to come to Southeast Asia. So I want to come to Thailand, to Vietnam and things. So my TikTok right now, because I've been looking at things and planning, it seems to think I'm a young white female solo traveler, because that's what my TikTok's just full of. I'm seeing all these young people traveling Thailand, and it's crazy because I'm planning it. But probably if I stay in New Zealand for 2 years, Australia for a year, I won't even be getting there for like the next 5 years. But yeah, that's the plan. But I won't be able to take anything with me, just my Kindle, pretty much.
Sounds like a great plan.
Yeah, yeah, I'm very excited. I'm sure we'll talk about it another time, but yeah. But yeah, Malazan, that's one I've been trying to get into. I actually read the first maybe 2 or 3 chapters of it at one point because I'm a mood reader, and so I just picked it up one day, and then I put it down because well, my mood caught another book. So, but yeah, I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on that when you start reading that, because it's a tricky one, that's for sure.
It's difficult. That's what I would call an advanced fantasy. I find it difficult as well. You really need to focus because you're just sort of plunged into this world where everything is already
Mhm.
established and you have to remember everything. And that I think that's a really great example, because I run into this criticism on fantasy a lot from different levels of readers when I was querying. Agents actually ask for fantasy accessible by everyone. So here's the thing: you hear people complain about fantasy have this book having too many point of views, this book is being too long, this book is confusing, and then at the same time you hear other people talk about the same book completely different.
Mm.
And when I was querying, I realized this because for agents, they actually categorize it that way because they know that there exists the level of fantasy where you need hardcore fantasy, somebody who's very experienced to get into books like that, like Malasan. And then you have beginner level who are just starting to get into fantasy, and that's the kind of fantasy that's accessible by
Yeah,
everyone. And it's very difficult for a debut author who hasn't established themselves to get in there with their debut if you start with an intermediate or advanced fantasy, because they don't trust you
yeah,
with that.
yeah.
And I
It's not
one of the
market.
things,
It's
yeah,
not like they just focused on what's gonna market well to the audience and how many readers is gonna reach, right?
it's a genre that's different from others. You don't have different levels of romance.
Yeah.
at different complications, but fantasy comes in different levels of epicness or sophistication, or how large the world building is. So different, you can't really judge all fantasies the same way. You sort of have to find your target readers. If you're aiming for a younger crowd or a newer crowd, just an introduction to fantasy, or mid-level or advanced. And yeah, I think my book is somewhere in the middle. So I do get both kinds of reviews. Some readers find it a bit difficult to follow so many point of views, and the ones that have read a lot of these books find it a breeze.
Yeah. I suppose I'll probably be one of the ones that might find it a breeze. It's funny because I remember so much stuff about. I got so many facts stuffed in my head about different worlds and things that actually I don't have room for normal things in my life. So I can actually be like quite forgetful because my head's just full of all these fantasy world building facts. But I probably wouldn't have it any other way. I love it. I love a big world and learning about it and the different religions and things that are there and the different quirks and things. And that's what I love about fantasy, is that it can really transport you and really use a secondary world to explore some really deep and personal issues that we face in the real world. And I think that's a really fascinating kind of mix that you kind of have in fantasy. The emotional side of things is often very relevant, and then you have this very different world that you're viewing it through.
Yeah, and put that way, it's great that we have such a large variety of fantasy books to choose from. You can go for the more emotional stuff. You can go for one that's really big on world building if you like them. But the most important thing I think debut authors need to realize is what they're writing, who they're writing it for, because when you target the wrong audience, it's like I said, fantasy audience is a huge mixture of different kinds of people at different reading levels.
Yeah.
And when you target the wrong audience, you can really be discouraged by comments from the wrong audience that are not made for your book.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that I struggled with when I started publishing and sharing my work. I've been writing for a long time for my eyes only, so I've never had to care about target audience. But once you publish, you sort of need to know who you want to target. And every time I get the wrong kind of readers, I would get reviews that are like the complete opposite of people who
Yeah.
love it for these things, and then you have another group who hate it for the same thing. And that was takes a little bit of time to understand, because as writers we are all upset when we
Of
get
course. Yeah. It's like they're
bad
your
reviews. But
babies,
you
right?
have to, yeah, you have to understand that readers are different, just like writers are. Yeah.
So you sort of mentioned briefly there about, you've been writing a long time. I believe it's something in about 2 decades is what I read online. So what kind of first started that writing? And it was like you said, just for your eyes only. So what kind of started that, and then what encouraged you to transition into sharing it with others?
I was just actually writing an article about this that's about to be published in a blog, but it's I've always had stories in my head, but one of the things, one of the main reasons why I really got into it is because I've always been an outcast. I'm a really sensitive person, and at the same time I'm stubborn. So when you're sensitive, you get bullies
Yeah.
automatically. People will find that a weakness. They
Yep.
they bully you, and when on top of that, when you're stubborn, you're not willing to bend. They target you. It's
Yeah.
not You're not just an easy target. You're going against them and they target you. And I've been an outcast ever since I remember. I would just, get into fights and people would find me rebellious and stuff. But it's also because I have this, I call it a superpower, because I can create my own world. It feels so real to me that I feel like I can just slip back into my imaginary world. Like people have imaginary friends when they were, a lot of people have that when they're young. I have an entire imaginary world. When I would come home from school, I would enter into my world. I would shut everything off. It felt so real to me. So I never felt like I needed to fit into the real world. So you could say that it started with me needing to find a place that I can control, a place where I'm wanted, a place where where it's not so bad. So that's an escape. And I've been doing that just in my head for up until maybe about 12. That when my friend gave me a novel, I've never read a novel. I started with manga. So I've never read an actual novel until my friend gave me one. It was a Thai novel, because we don't get it. I wasn't, good at English at that time. So I read the first novel because my friend was reading it, and I just popped out to me that, wow, so I can actually write my stories down like this and it will feel real, right? I can save it and it feels more solid because it's on the page. So I've been writing since then. From the first book that I picked up, I discovered that I could write down all these stories. So I started writing from then. By about 14, I was writing trilogies to escape into.
That's crazy.
And that was the main reason, because I was bullied at school. I wasn't happy. I came back to my own little corner. I entered my world. I have imaginary friends, hundreds of them. My class list was huge. I was writing multiple point of views since, from the beginning. And so I've been doing that ever since. And I think you may have heard on Twitter that I've lived on 4 continents. I moved from Bangkok to New Zealand to the UK. I was in Cambridge for about a year and a half. And then I moved to the US and I graduated there. And I think throughout those years, it was me looking for a place where I feel like I belong, looking for a reality that I want to be in, and I didn't find it. So I kept writing for my eyes only. That was why. And then I met my husband in the US. And that sort of changed everything. He gave me a world that I want to be in, and I have children now, so I have my own little world, but it's just the size of my house or condo at the moment. When I get out there, I still don't like reality. I still want to go back to my own world. So my journey is different from many people who started out wanting to write and be a writer. I was writing to keep myself company, to find a place where I can control where I belong. I created fictional characters because they don't hurt me. That it's a very personal experience to me. And the worst thing actually was sharing my work. That I feel like I opened the gate to hell. I started sharing for the first time by writing fan fiction, because I was reading this manga. I saw people writing fan fiction. I wanted to try. I posted a chapter. It was very well received, and I ended up writing a trilogy of fan fiction for 7 years, and that blew up. It blew up. By the end of 6-7 years, I've had 7 translations of that trilogy. That was fan fiction. And a lot of my readers were saying, you need to go pro, you need to start publishing your own originals. And I've had a lot of originals, but not Obsidian. This is something I wrote, I started after I finished that
Yeah.
fanfic trilogy. And so I did that because, you know, by popular demand, people say, oh, you should try and go pro and publish. And I got carried away and said, okay, let's do that. Let's try. So, so that was the time when I came back also from Mongolia. I was in Mongolia for 21 days on a horseback trip that goes around the loop, staying with different nomad families
Oh,
and
incredible.
traveling on horseback. It changed my life, and it gave me the idea for this book because it changed my perspective when I come back to the real world, to the modern world. I live in Bangkok, so it's a really big city. It's
Yeah.
totally different from the steppes, and I feel like that trip has made me a lot happier person because I figure out that you don't actually need much to be
Mm.
happy, because when I was in Mongolia, there was no electricity, no plumbing, no toilet, nothing, no phone signals for 3 weeks. I lived like a
Yeah.
nomad.
Sounds
I lived, I
amazing.
ate with them everywhere we go. We were on horseback. And that was like going back to fantasy, right? Because
Yeah.
yeah, because you don't have technology at all. There were no
That
roads.
sounds wonderful. I'll be very honest. I'd love that.
It sounds like a rough trip, but by the end of the first week, I settled in, and that was the most relaxing time I've had in my life. And I felt like this is what life should be. And when I get home, I feel like all my problems were really small. And it's just all the worries that you have. It's just this modern world tricking you to believe that you need all these things when you actually don't.
Yeah.
And so why I still want these things, when I don't get them, I don't feel so bad. And once you get to know people like, you know, Mongolian nomads, they live differently, they're really proud. It's amazing because they don't have anything more than they can carry on their cart when they move,
Mm.
right? I've never seen anybody stand as proud. And I've met millionaires, people who are really rich, really famous, and they don't feel as warrior like proud like
Oh,
as the nomads that I was staying with, and they have nothing. And that really inspired me to write. So Obsidian is about two races. One is more like who we are. What they live in this big city, they have all these civilizations, they have comfort, and then you have nomads who are just as happy. They're proud, and they don't have much. They don't need much. All they need is freedom. So this is a book about freedom and the price of freedom as well,
mm.
and the clashing views between somebody who lives in the city. uh the first few chapters, you will see that I discussed a lot. There are two characters from different sides, and they
Mhm.
were just arguing really because they're at war, and they were arguing, well, you if you know when you live in the city, your people are safe, there are laws that protect everything is manageable, but and then the other side, the nomads would say, well, that's not the life that we want. But I mean, it feels like you're living in a cage. So
Yeah.
you actually, for safety, you sort of have to live in some kind of cage.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So and they would rather have chaos and freedom than being in a cage and safe. So that's the two clashing ideas. I don't have a bad or a good side. There are good sides and bad sides to both. And that's the kind of book that I wanted to write because I live in this city. I see the good points of it, and I've seen the other side as well. And that's something that I don't make decisions on what is better. Readers have to do that and think about it themselves. This is one of the area where Steve really pointed out during the interviews that made him rethink about what freedom is and what he and the freedom that we've lost for the
Yeah.
sake of safety and security today. And yeah, that's one of the themes, the many themes in the book that came from me having been back through from Mongolia. But that was another part why I decided to publish, because I feel like I want to share this with the world. That it's a view that very few people would probably experience. And so I published, and what happened is once I've taken my world, which was private to me, where I can go in without, making sure that nobody can go in and hurt me, and
Yeah.
publish it to the world. Now I'm being attacked.
Yeah. You're
It's
opening
a
up yourself. Yeah.
tourist attraction now. It's not my home anymore. It's the tourist attraction, and anyone can just come in, read it, hate it, attack me for it, or love it.
Gosh.
So that was really hard for me. I think many of my followers know that I complain a lot. Every once in a while, I have this tantrum that I'm going to pull my book. It's not about not selling, because I feel sometimes like I don't want to keep this public anymore because it
Yeah.
hurts, and I don't want to lose this place that is mine. And so I keep saying, sometimes when something bad happens, I say I want to pull my book.
The way that you were describing those themes, it just makes you want to just leap out of bed and go grab the Kindle right now and just get started, because I think that resonated so much with me. I really find these kind of concepts fascinating. I studied philosophy and things at what we call A level, so when I was about 17, 18. And so I love reading kind of these really um opposing themes in books, and exploring that. And it's not, I mean, you get the epic and the cool moments and the badass lines and things, but it's also something deeper than that. And so I was gonna ask about, now that you've got it out in the public, and we did sort of speak a little about this a minute ago, but have you now gone sort of somewhere else? Do you have a different world that's your own now that your world has become so public?
Not really. For one thing, because I have a family now, I don't really need that world so much.
Mhm.
But I'm trying to save this world for me, at least during my writing sessions. I'm trying to think that I'm writing for me, that it is a struggle. And I think part of the things that makes this book good to begin with, that makes me a good writer to begin with, is my ability to just dive into this world and blend that and completely believe that it's real. And once you publish, that becomes pretty hard, especially when I quit querying, partly because of this. Because at one point I was writing book 2 at the time while I was querying book 1.
Yeah.
And I have voices in my head now why I write book 2, voices of editors, of things that agents said they wanted I'm not doing. It was ruining my book. It pulled me out of my own world.
Yeah.
I'm trying to save that at the moment. It's a struggle. That's why it takes me a long time to finish book 2, longer than usual. I mean, it took me 7 years to write book 1, but
I
that
was
was
gonna ask, yeah. Wow. That's, I mean, it's a
but
long
partly
book, so
because I threw away 70K of it.
oh my goodness.
I got to 70K. I realized that I was starting this book at the wrong generation of characters. I started out later in the book. That to this point, the actual series now hasn't actually reached the point that I started writing it.
Could have
And
saved
I
it for
realized,
later.
yeah, sort of. I started writing, and I realized these characters have backstories that need to be told before I can tell these things. So I tossed away 70K of it, start over,
Oh gosh.
go back another generation, and started from zero, and that's why it took me so long. But also life, I have a business, I have 2 children. I usually can't write that fast in a way, but getting into my world was never a problem until I started clearing. And so I stopped clearing, it got better. But once I published, there were months that I was worried about the results of the first book, how it's going to be received. And that pulled me out of my world. And I have this rule of whatever happens, I am never going to ruin my book. That's how I intend to save it. So whenever I get pulled out of my world, I stop writing immediately until I can totally get back into it. So that's my personal rule. If I feel like there's something wrong, if I cannot feel like I'm totally immersed in that world, I don't write. That's the day I stop writing, I start again tomorrow. So in a way, I still have this world that I can go back in, but it's it's not easy
Yeah.
as easy as before. That's one of the reasons why I felt like I should maybe pull my book. Sometimes I get that tantrum, but somebody stops me.
Thank God I got it on my Kindle already. So
but my readers would always come and stop me, and then they help me through.
intervention.
I always find my readers, my family. I'm posting new chapters from book 2 on Wattpad, chapter by chapter now.
Okay.
And so there are people, hundreds of people reading book 2, and they're waiting for the new chapter for book 2. And they are the ones that have been with me for years, have carried me through, gave me a reason to keep sharing. And that's something that that makes me continue to share. And then but at the same time, I need to save this world for me as well. So if you ask me right now, I'm in the middle of that struggle. Still, I would wake up someday and then totally regret my decision to have published this at all. Never mind how much I've made or how many copies I've sold. Sometimes you just feel it's not worth it. This is the book of my life. This is my life's masterpiece, the book I want to die with. I don't want it altered by anyone or any feeling outside, besides me. And I have to keep reminding myself that I'm publishing, and whatever I make from it is a bonus. I don't want to be a writer. I'm not writing this to be a successful writer or to make it a successful book. I'm writing this book for me, and whatever I get from it is a bonus.
Yeah, I think this is something a lot of authors, struggle with. When they're writing book 1, they can take 30 years if they wanted to, but suddenly as soon as book 1 is out, it's almost like you feel like you've got a contract with the reader that, well, now you've got to deliver on the next one. And it's interesting because I was reading this article we've got a newspaper over here called The Guardian, and there were some authors that were giving advice, and it was quite funny because there were quite a few conflicting advice like that the authors were giving. So it'd be sort of one sentence, this famous author said this one actually says the opposite. But one thing that stuck with me was, I can't remember who it was, but it was one of the authors was saying, don't write what you know, write what you feel, which I thought really stuck with me, because if you're not writing what you're feeling, then what are you putting into your book? I think there's always something of an author inside their books, and there's always something in those stories they want to tell.
I agree. That's how I run as well. If I don't feel it, I don't write it. I feel like I would be wasting my readers' time. And from 7 years of sharing fan fiction, the great thing about sharing books online chapter by chapter is because you get feedback every chapter from hundreds of people.
Yeah, so it's like beta reading, I guess.
Sometimes on paragraphs, and And so I've noticed during those 7 years that whenever I write, because I'm trying to speed up the process because people want the next chapter, and then I just write why I don't really actually feel it. I get fewer comments. It doesn't come out as well, and readers can feel it. I've
Yeah.
had thousands of comments, believe me. Readers can feel it. When you don't feel it, readers know. They don't feel it either.
Yeah.
And that's where I feel like as a reader, that's where a lot of book failed for me, because I could see the writer writing this to finish the book.
Mm.
And I end up usually not finishing reading those books
Yeah.
because I feel like they're not writing from the heart. They're not writing what they're passionate about. They're writing to finish a book, to get to release another book, and then to make more money. And I'm a writer. When I write my own book, I feel intensely. So I actually don't need somebody else's book at all. If you can't write to make me feel that intensely, I would use that time to write my own book.
Yeah.
I don't finish those books, and I feel like that's something from a reader's point of view that I want to remind writers as well, because believe me, readers can feel it when you're not into it.
They
So
really
one
can. Yeah.
one other rule that I have with writing is that if I ever feel like this chapter or this paragraph or this scene is a chore to write, I don't write it. You either have to find that the passion in writing this scene, or you skip it.
Mm-hmm.
Because as soon as it bores you, it's definitely gonna bore readers.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if you cannot entertain yourself writing it, nobody is entertained by your writing.
Yeah.
So I think that writer saying that was it's true. You have to write what you feel. It's not about what you know, it's what you feel. And when you really feel it and you have the skills to express that in words, that's what readers want to know. That's what readers want to read. They want to feel something. I think that
Absolutely.
person is right on. Yeah.
My favorite books are books that, they've really made me feel. They've made me care. They've made me cry, which isn't always easy to do. And you can absolutely tell when someone's trying to put the emotion in, but it feels like they're just filling the formula. And then when someone's actually almost sharing a piece of themselves in there, and you can feel that this really meant something to them, so you can absolutely sort of sense that as a reader, especially readers that have read so many books that at a certain point all the world building starts to blur together, and you've got to find other ways to kind of distinguish things. So especially in the fantasy community, we're big readers, so we definitely get, like, we know the techniques that authors use. We get used to it, so it becomes harder and harder to find that authenticness in a book. So when it does, that's when it really hits you, and that's when I really remember a book. And the difference for me between a 4-star and a 5-star is, a 4 stars, I really enjoyed it, and it sticks in my mind. That it was a good time, and I thought it was well written. A 5-star is something that it took me on a journey. It's something that I wasn't necessarily the same as I was when I started it, and yeah.
Exactly. A book that changes you stays with you a long time. It's
100%.
really difficult to write, and I don't think people realize that fantasy readers actually read a lot. I mean, you can say you've read The Wheel of Time, and that's the equivalent of maybe what 20, 30 romance books. Because each one
More.
of it
Yeah.
is something. Because I was counting, I saw somebody say, "Oh, I've read, I don't know, 30, 50 titles this year," and I was thinking, like, there is no way as a fantasy reader that I'm going to get through 50 titles in a
I'm
year.
trying to make 45 this year, but I'm on track. I'm on track. But the thing is, it includes novellas as well. So I'm trying to do 45 full novels. I'm technically on track, but we'll see. It's the audio books.
You look at it, other genres have, like, that thick, and
Yeah.
each volume of fantasy is proper fantasy books are
If
like
a
that.
fantasy book is like 200 pages, I used to have this sort of, I guess in a way, prejudice that I was sort of thinking, hang on a minute, why is it only 200 pages? It's a fantasy
Yeah,
book. I'm suspicious. What's happening here? Not like,
yeah,
oh,
it
it's not,
was
it can't be fantasy, but I'm like, why is it so short? This is like a novella, but
I
actually
have, yeah.
that's a full novel.
You said you used to. I have that prejudice still. I admit it. I have that prejudice, but it's um it's reasonable for me because I am a traveler. I
Yeah,
don't do weekend getaways. So if I say I'm going to go to a country, usually I spend about at least 3 weeks or a month
mm,
in that country or maybe the surrounding areas. I don't just go to France to see a few sites and come back in 5 days. I don't do that. And
yeah,
reading a shorter book is like that to me. It doesn't give me enough time to bond with the characters or the book. It can be good. I'm not saying that short books are not good.
mm,
I've read some that are really, really good, but I'm just the kind of reader that wants to be on a long journey.
yeah. Me too.
So,
Me
yeah.
too. I always see it's interesting. I always say that I seek out the chunk because I suppose 500 pages is fairly large, but I always assumed until I'd sort of joined Storygraph and Goodreads and I saw my actual sort of data in the graph form, I always thought, wow, I read all these, really, really long books. Actually, most of my books are 500 pages or under, which is a big surprise to me. But it does make sense because obviously I might read more pages in a big book, but I read less of them. Whereas a shorter book, I read more of them. So it makes sense, but I sort of feel almost a bit like imposter syndrome. I'm the prince of the Chonkland, but most of my books are 500 pages or under. But
Yeah, no, I don't read physical anymore, so I don't even know how many pages or how thick.
yeah,
But if it's printed, it used to be like if I can't kill anybody with this book, then I'm not reading it. I was thinking of that scene in John Wick where they were in the library and the guy
I
was
haven't
was
actually seen
killing
John Wick.
somebody.
I need to.
Oh, this
I
this
really
scene
need
happened
to.
in the library, and there was a fight scene in it, and he was killing a guy with a book that thick.
Oh wow.
And I watched that, and I was like, yeah, that's about it. That's how I pick my
Yeah.
rating. I can't beat somebody to death with a book.
It must be
That's
one of
not a
Ryan
book to
Cahill's
me.
books. Oh my goodness, that thing! I'm just reading of War and Ruin by Ryan Cahill. I'm 44% through that, and I was trying to read it all in a month, and I've had to kind of put it on pause. That thing is like 1,300 pages. Oh goodness, I'm still waiting for my hardcover. Eventually, will come in a couple of months. Oh boy, that thing is
Wow.
going to be deadly.
Yeah, but for people like us, like we drool over books like that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I don't
Yeah,
need
but
security alarms
please
here.
don't
I've got, I've got my
I'm like,
chunk of
yes, this is
weapons.
not gonna end quickly. This is
Yeah.
good.
The funny thing is, though, once you get to the end, you sort of feel like, oh, is that it? Like, I want to read more. Like, well, if it's a good book, anyway.
Yeah, I started writing fan fiction because of that feeling because I didn't get enough. And fan fiction was a way of continuing that story in a way. I don't want to say making it my own, but
Mm,
it's the way I can continue to live in a story that I really want, and that was another writing experience that was really helpful for me as an author to grow. Actually,
yeah.
this is one of the things that I tell new writers a lot, that if you can, even if you don't share it, if you're against using someone else's characters and stuff, try writing fan fiction for a little bit, because what happens is when you write somebody else's character, is you have to study that characterization
Mm,
to make sure that it's in line, to make sure that you are still writing this person. You have to work within a wall, and that developed a really good habit for me as when I developed my own original characters, one of the most frequent praises that I get is that my characterization is very, very solid and it's very clear. And that's, I have fan fiction writing to thank, because it gave me this habit of keep going back and check if I'm still writing the same person, that I'm not inserting myself into this character. I have to be careful all the time. Was this character speaks like this, the other one speaks differently, and I have to go back and check their backgrounds to make sure that it's in line. So that's characterization is something that I find many new writers are quite weak at, because they're just starting out. Sometimes they don't even know, their own characters that well yet. And that's one thing, one of the strengths of, if you read books from people who started out writing fan fiction successfully or for a long time, that's one of the traits that I see most often. Their characterization is very strong, because they've had to work with an established characters, so they know what to look for to make sure that they stay in character. That's Chow Boy. What are you doing?
Oh, this is really cute.
Yeah, this is what everybody wants to see, not me.
Yeah, I'll just release this part of the video.
But yeah, so yeah, that's one of the things a lot of people who have never written or read fan fiction missed out. Also, when you read from free web novels, it doesn't even have to be fan fiction, but web novel writers are people who actually write out of passion, pure passion, because they're not looking for money. They're looking for readers. They're doing what they love. And what you get from that is very different from published books. Doesn't matter if it's indie or trad pop. What you get from that is maybe poorly edited book, but you get passion. You get materials that are never put in fences. They do whatever they want, and the possibility is limitless. And then that if you can take that and then edit it really well and grow your writing skills, you can write a really compelling book, because you started off with no fence at all. I was used to that. I started reading for about a decade. I was reading online. I was reading web novels. I was reading fan fiction, and it's just different. Is it poorer quality? Yeah, because they don't need to edit that well. They're not charging you money, but you see the passion. You see how it goes different directions, and I think that just really adds to a writer's skill. So I try to read different kinds of books from different mediums, and it just adds different things.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's not something I've ever really considered or heard often as advice, but it makes a lot of sense. And one of my new favorite authors, Kian N. Ardalan, he just came out with 11th Cycle, incredible book. And he actually started, writing off Reddit, just writing off using r/writing prompts, and eventually he grew to, doing stuff on his own subreddit, and then that led to him getting his current job where he writes books for the company he works for, and then writing his own books. And I think that's something that I see in indies a lot as well, which is why I love indie and self-pub as compared to traditional publishing. I mean, there's some wonderful trad books out there, but I often find that at the forefront of creativity and ingenuity, and the books that make me care the most have been self-published books, because like you say, there is no boundary. There is nobody telling them you can't do this, this is too long. And I dread to think what someone like Ryan Cahill's books would look like as a trad pub, because I mean, he's a great author, so I'm sure it'd be fantastic, but I fear this 1,300 page book would definitely be cut in half. And I feel like you would lose a lot of these moments that in a trad publishing you might look at and go, oh, this is a bit too slow, but actually it's actually the little moments that make us care, the little character moments that aren't necessarily crucial to the plot, but they allow us as a reader to invest in the characters. And that's what I love about self-published fantasy, that you get that freedom and the creativity that comes out of that is just wonderful.
Yeah, just anything goes with that. That's one reason why I pulled Obsidian from the from the querying pile. I had actually 4 full requests out, still unanswered at the point. I looked at my book. I talked to Richard Nell, who is a best-selling fantasy indie as well, and he really inspired me because he did everything himself and succeeded, and I loved his book. And after talking to him, I feel like, no, I want to keep this book unaltered. I can't work. I realized too late that I can't work with a publisher who would have some control over me over this.
Yeah.
So I wrote to the agents like, I'm not querying this book anymore, and they had my full request on hand. Yeah, so that's something that happened. But speaking of just writing on Reddit, and was he releasing 1 chapter at a time as well?
And I think so. I think he started off as just, you get like the writing prompts. Somebody will write a sentence each day, and then you go and comment and write however long you want. Most of them are, few short paragraphs, not much more than that. And I think it was just for fun. And then people sort of said to him, "Hey, you're actually really good at this," and so he actually sort of started taking it kind of seriously. And I'm so glad, because this book is one of the most heartfelt, just and also devastating books that I've ever read. And I think that's the book that I've cried at the most. I think that it takes that on, and he's a wonderful author. And I think it does show that when you've had that experience of doing these different kinds of writing before you write your own things. So definitely I think that's great advice, and it's not something I've heard before, which is not easy to do with writing advice. So I'll probably put that out as a clip actually on the shorts, because I think that's a really, really good thing to put out there.
Well, here's another thing I think you also haven't heard. When you publish 1 chapter at a time as a web novelist, that's how we all do it. Yeah. So for Wattpad, for example, what you want to break Wattpad's algorithm, you have to publish something every Friday. That's like the trick. So it tricks the website to show your work around. And so most authors will either publish 2 chapters a week or 1 chapter a week if you can. What happens is, when you have to write, especially if you're a pantser, if you don't have a full book finished, when you have to write 2K chunks of things, of chapter at a time, and then you get the stats of readers reading, you are forced to make each 2K chunk. You can go to 2,000 or 3,000 words, but usually people stick around 2,000 words for a chapter for Wattpad. That's sort of like a average good length that people can concentrate on a website. Because remember, this is not a book. The format is different, like reading off a web page. So anything over 2K or 3K is a bit hard to navigate. So what happens is, once you get into that habit of posting 1 chapter at a time, you write your chapters in a way that there's a beginning, that's like which is an opening line. Sort of everybody opens the book only once. For web novels, it's like we have to open it every chapter to make sure that readers come in and they continue to read. Because that's what the great thing about free readers is, they have absolutely no obligation to continue reading your book unless it's really good. So they can, because when you pay for a book, you want to read all of it because you don't want to waste money. But when you don't pay for a book, you will stop maybe at chapter 3, at chapter 4, maybe halfway through chapter 4 if it starts boring you. So we are trained to entertain readers from word 1 on that chapter to the end of it, just to make sure that they stick with you to the end and that they continue to read the next chapter. So you work with a structure where every chapter, every 2K chunks must have something. And that's the really strong point of web novel writers. When you read my book, I think you will see that pattern, because I have about, my chapters are around 2K to 4K, depending on, some chapters it runs a little longer, but you will see a beginning, a middle, and a climax, and then a cliffhanger. Oh, that's almost like a structure of every chapter. So it's something that keeps readers going. Whereas if you write the whole book and share like the traditional way of writing a book, you share with no one, and then you have this big, sometimes you end up writing scenes that are not needed, or you have big chunks of stuff where nothing happens because you don't actually think about it. You're thinking in a linear way of, oh, I'm writing from beginning to end. When you share one chapter at a time, you have to have a climax, sort of, and something intense happening every chapter, and that's a really useful.
Yeah, that's gonna keep the reading long into the night, I think. Too long, probably.
Yeah. So yeah, that's something that I would recommend new writers to try as well. So writing one chapter at a time, try sharing it, and then you'll end up having that habit of making sure every small chunks of your book has something for readers to enjoy, to keep going.
Fascinating. So I was gonna ask, it's sort of related, because you've been writing and I guess reading fantasy for a long time now. So it's kind of like a two-handed question, but how have you seen fantasy kind of change over the time that you've been reading and writing? And then how would you like to see it change potentially in the future?
It's difficult because for the indies books and traditional published books are different. They go different directions.
Yeah.
So I've sort of moved away from traditionally published book, unless it's from an author, a known author that I've been reading since 10, 15 years ago. They still do things the same way. But on the trad side, that I see it, fantasy being less complicated, more commercialized.
Yeah.
And I don't like the way language art is going at the moment, at least for most trad, because it's simpler and it's more, I call it fast food.
Okay, yeah, I see where you're going, yeah.
And at the extreme point of it is like telling me a story with stick figure drawings, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So that's getting through they're throwing me dialogues, they're just getting through the plot, lining up who said what, and then just going through the plot, and that's it. And that's a stick figure to me. There's very little art in language use in newer fantasy books on the trad side. And because I queried, I also realized that they're screening, books that were written in a more classical way out of the pile, because they want to, a lot of people to be able to access this fantasy, the largest group possible. And that old writing descriptive style is sort of out of trend. So on the trad side, I'm not enjoying many books because of that, because I like language, I like descriptions, and I like to see great rich metaphors, similes, and those kind of techniques. that it's language. It's not just plot and character, and I feel that's missing, and it could be improved. But on the other hand, indies who have been rejected, which is it's good for me.
Yeah.
Some people will say
It,
that,
it is. Yeah.
indie books are like trash because they've been rejected. But I mean, as of now, I was reading some Hugo Award winners that I wasn't happy with the quality, and I was reading indie that I really love, and I feel like being rejected by trad pop is not exactly a bad thing
Yeah, not
anymore.
always, that's for sure.
You're just doing something different, and this is the pie where definitely there are horrible books in it and poorly edited and people who are just beginners. I would rather call it that, because you will see beginners doing it because they can, and
Yeah,
that's not a bad thing. People can grow, writers can grow. So
absolutely.
I may
And
not
you can go
read
back and
books.
change it, which is wonderful. I've seen a lot of indie authors go, okay, I've grown in my writing. I'm going to take my book down, re-edit it, and put it back out there, which is something you can't do with trad
Totally
publishing.
do that. But I mean, on the indie side, there's just a mixture of, you just have to find gems from there. But these gems you will not find on the trad pop pile. So for indies, I would like to see more people, not being afraid of being rejected by a trad pop, and
Yeah,
totally go for what they really want to do, and have a little bit more confidence in releasing something that is not, because you get a lot of rules coming from the agents and publishers that, okay, you have to write, you have to follow these structures, you have to, and then that ruins a lot of the books on the indie side because they were following that pattern, and they lose what is great about being indie, which is the freedom
yeah,
and the stuff that trad pop are not, accepting right now. And I want to see more of that, more of the crazy stuff. I want to see
yeah,
somebody who is really loud, who aren't afraid of, bad publicity, who say what they really, because you can't do that in trad pop anymore. Trad pop is really safe right now, so you don't actually get authors who say anything or write anything that goes against the trend or even a little bit controversial. You're not going to see that. And
yeah,
I would really love it if, to see more indie authors really put those stuff back into the literary world, because I find that that's missing right now. We get a lot more of it now, but I mean, indies, when they're also afraid of, bad publicity as well, because it's already hard for us to sell.
yeah,
And we're already attacked that it is. But the way I see it, since we're in a hard position at this, in a hard position anyway, we might as well do whatever we want.
yeah. You got to take
And
some risks as an author,
die
and
with it.
yeah. But yeah, and I suppose like doing your life as having lots of adventures and things and taking some of those risks, I suppose maybe has that kind of transposed into taking risks as a writer and an author.
Oh, definitely. I always say that when people say, "Oh, don't write," I get this a lot. Like, you're writing too many point of views. You have too many MCs, or you can't pull that off. And I'm like, I've been, I, I travel for fun, taking risks in, South America, backpacking, when I don't speak a
Oh,
single word of
I'm so
Spanish.
jealous.
Believe me, I'm not afraid of not pulling out something fictional.
Yeah.